All right, so welcome everybody to our workshop on communicating the significance of your research. Um, I am Dr. Keith McCall. I'm the Assistant Director of the Office of Graduate Fellowships and Awards. I'm joined today by our graduate assistant who will soon graduate, Dr. Honorine Royer. It's one of the last, this might be the last OGFA workshop she is here for, actually. We have one more, but I don't think she'll attend it. So everybody, give her a thumbs up or something, because Honorine has been at OGFA longer than I have, and we are sad to be losing her, but happy that she is moving on.
Thank you, Keith.
So communicating the significance of your research to a broad audience is a really vital skill. Today, we're going to focus on it in the context of fellowship and award applications, but it's a skill that you use all over the place in your graduate career and after graduate life. Everything from talking to family members at family get-togethers when they ask you what it is you do, why it matters, to going out in the job market, having an interview, to applying for funding, whether that's as a graduate student or later in your career, to even things like submitting an abstract for a conference or an article for a journal or a book proposal where you have to pitch the audiences that should be interested in your book. So it's a skill that matters all over the place. And to do it well requires doing it in a way that is understandable to as many people as possible, and that you get the important parts across pretty quickly and get straight to the point. And it's also a skill that we just don't really focus on that much in graduate school. So much of graduate training is focused on teaching you the specialized language of your discipline, your field, and so that you're learning all these, the jargon and the perspectives and the frameworks that allow you to talk to other experts in your field. And so much of the focus is on that we sometimes lose sight of being able to communicate all those same ideas to people who aren't also experts, who don't share that same specialized language with you. And the truth is that outside of your own discipline, nobody really cares about that jargon. It doesn't make you look smarter to them. It just confuses the message that you're trying to get across. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how you can communicate to both experts in your field and to broader audiences at the same time, because in most applications where you're discussing the importance of your research, they're going to care that you can do both. Most fellowships, for instance, so for instance, the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Fellowship Program, it wants to see both that you can sort of speak science and talk to other experts and show that you understand how your field works. But because it's funded by taxpayers, the National Science Foundation also wants to know that they are giving money to people who can communicate why that research matters to the public, because the public is who pays the taxes and who foots the bill for that research. A lot of funding organizations work like that. They want to know that you both possess the ability to sound like an expert in your field, but that you can also communicate to the audiences beyond your field who maybe contribute to funding that organization or otherwise are sort of stakeholders in that program. So at any point during the presentation today, as you have questions, please drop them into the chat. We will, I'll pause and read things. We'll make time for Q&A, but don't feel like you need to hold any questions you have. If anything's unclear, go ahead and either raise your hand or drop something in the chat and I'll get to it as soon as I can. Okay, so I want to start with us reading this quote. This is from Elizabeth Cohen. She's Dean of the Radcliffe Institute, which is it's a prestigious advanced research, interdisciplinary research institute affiliated with Harvard. And their fellowships are competitive and, prestigious. So she has a lot of experience reviewing applications to be a part of the Radcliffe Institute. And this quote is from the book, How to Get Grant Money in the Humanities and Social Sciences, where the writer interviewed a bunch of people who were involved in this sort of thing. And this is what Elizabeth Cohen said. So take a moment and read this, and then I want to know what comes across to you from this quote. To the point. So a couple other things I think are worth pulling out of this is the I want to know immediately. So you, put important things first. Be direct. Exactly. The immediacy of the message you're trying to get across. Whether you have a 10-page proposal or a 2-page proposal, if your reader doesn't know in the first paragraph what it is that you're doing and why it matters, they're not going to want to read beyond that. If you've got a 10-page proposal, you might be able to have your broad claim to significance come on page 2, but there should be things that are leading them to want to get to page 2 before that. What you really don't want to do though is wait till, you can't pull your punches and wait until the end of the thing to tell people why it matters. It needs to be apparent from the get-go, or reviewers just aren't going to read through the whole thing, no matter how short it is. So the sort of key points are that your claims of significance or your impact, so whether you're doing research or maybe you're in something that's practice-based, or maybe you do creative work. It doesn't matter. I'm going to say research today because that's the name of this workshop, but all of those things are all of those fields apply for funding. They all have some way of communicating why it is what they do matters. And so you should be thinking about putting that in a context for a non-specialist audience. So avoiding jargon and technical terms. If you have to use technical terms, you should think about ways to define them in a way that is understandable to other readers. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. You also want to indicate how your work departs from or connects to previous work in the field, but that isn't enough to establish significance. It's not enough to say there's a gap in the literature and I'm filling it, or nobody else has done this before. Because sometimes the reason that gap exists is because other people have looked at it and decided it doesn't matter to fill that gap. It's not an important area. Or this is a new thing, but the reason nobody else has done it before is because it's not really significant. It's not really important. Right? So it's not enough to simply say that this relates to other work and is filling in, is extending that work or filling in gaps that work left. So what you really want to do is be able to quickly answer some version of this last question. With this work, we will be able to answer X, do Y, or better understand Z. So you really need to focus on explaining the benefits, right? It's not enough to just fill in the gap. If you can't think of a way to both explain what you're doing and why it's better than previous ways of doing it, then you haven't yet hit on how to word your claim to significance for whatever it is you're doing. So I just put together this little example of, if you were the first person to design steamboats, you might say something like that current ship designs rely on sails for propulsion, but sailboats are limited by the strength and direction of the wind. So you've established sort of where things are and what the limitations for that are. My new design uses steam engines for propulsion, a technology that allows ships to move independently of the wind. My steam-driven vessels are ideal for river navigation, for instance, since they allow captains to steer the best route along twisting river channels regardless of the wind's direction. So a clear communication of not just what existed before and what you're doing differently, but what the benefit of the difference is, why it matters that you're doing something new. So again, the focus is really to be on, what is the advantage, the improvement, the promise, the impact, in what ways is your work better than what came before, not just different than what came before. Now I say that you should always, of course, be gracious to the things that came before. You don't want to say that they were trash and that everything you're doing is better. But the point is to communicate the benefits, not just the difference. Okay, and then critically, and this really matters for fellowship writing, you have to consider the audience. Different audiences are going to care about different things. Many of us, especially, it looked like there were a lot of doctoral students here, so potentially you're doing a dissertation. Over the span of a dissertation, you do a lot of different things. There's a lot of different parts of that dissertation you could emphasize to one review audience versus another. There's going to be things that they care about in one place that they don't really care about in another. In one place, they might care more about your methodology. In another, they might care more about your primary findings. Some might care about both, but care about them again in different ways than another organization will. And again, this is the same whether it's fellowship applications or pitching something to a journal or a conference. So for instance, my dissertation dealt with free people's migrations in the US South after the Civil War. If I were pitching an article about that to the Journal of Southern History, I'd really focus on things that have to do with the Southern aspect of that, sort of Southern identity and Southernness as part of the question. If I were pitching it to the Journal of African American History, I'd really be focusing on how migration related to African American politics. So my dissertation did both, but depending on the audience I'm pitching it to, I would emphasize one aspect over another. And there are times where, especially with fellowship reviews, you might be communicating to multiple different audiences over the course of that review. So there are some that are going to have a tiered review process where on one level you're speaking to experts in your field who, again, are going to want to see that you can communicate in the language of other experts in the field. And then it's going to go to a broader audience who isn't going to know all the specialized language or debates in your field, and they're going to want to see that you can communicate the broader significance of what you're doing. So sometimes you have to be balancing these things and thinking about approaching both sides, both the specialist side and the non-specialist side. And one way to figure out what you have to do is to spend a lot of time researching what that audience is. Many fellowship reviewers make this pretty easy, fellowship processes make this pretty easy. Spend time on their website. Figure out what the mission and goal of that funding organization is and what the mission and goal of that particular funding opportunity is. They might make it clear who the reviewers are, and they'll tell you that reviewers are going to be drawn from various fields, or they'll say reviewers are going to be from your same field. That lets you know what sort of level of jargon you can get away with. If you know what the mission is, you can think about emphasizing aspects of your work that fit more with the mission or goal of that funding opportunity. And so spend time understanding as much as you can what the expectations of that review audience are going to be.
Can we use the same keywords as the fellowship or grants used in their mission or goals, or we should be use some similar but not the same words?
That's a great question. And I would say the answer depends. It's yes. You definitely want to be, where you can, trying to mirror some of their language. You may not want to have it exactly in the same wording they have, but you want to make it clear to them that you see the connection between what it is they are trying to do and what your work does. You want to show them as clearly as you can in the way that you word it that your work will help them forward their mission, right? Because that's why they're investing in you. They would choose you as an applicant because they see you as somebody who will help forward whatever their bigger mission or goal is. So yeah, if they are pretty clear about, we're looking for work that addresses issues of climate change and water scarcity, you want to make sure that in your proposal it's very clear that your work focuses on climate change and water scarcity.
As far as you know, do some fellowship grants scanning the first applicants by machine or by some AI, or do they use real human to do the whole process?
So there's been talk of the role of AI in some of these things. I haven't heard of any of the grant mechanisms I'm familiar with for graduate students having AI as part of the process right now. Everything I'm aware of is still human-based.
Okay.
So that's, yes. They won't be scanning for, if you it's not like, I know this is becoming more popular in like corporate hiring where they might get 1,000 resumes sent in for one position. There are some graduate things that are going to get a bunch of applications, but they also get a bunch of people to review. And those reviewers, they won't be scanning for exactly the same keyword, but they'll be looking for that alignment between how you describe what you do and what it is that their funding opportunity does.
Good. That's very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, back to if it says in the call for proposals that they want you to be focusing on climate change and water scarcity, and we get to the end of your application and it has said, in the first page, it says nothing about climate change or water scarcity, they're probably not really going to consider your application. And so here's a scenario I thought of for thinking through how you might communicate the same project to different audiences. So what I mean when I'm saying you can emphasize different aspects to different audiences based on what it is you think they are looking for. So in this scenario, there's this great digital history project called Mapping Occupation. It uses GIS, graphical information systems, to map the occupation of the U.S. Army in the U.S. South after the Civil War. And if you were pitching that to, so let's say that was your dissertation work and you wanted to apply for funding through both the graduate sabbatical grant from the Institute for Humane Studies, and you wanted to apply for the Mellon ACLS Dissertation Innovation Fellowship. These both are humanities-oriented funding mechanisms, but they have very different missions and very different sort of funding goals. So the IHS, the Institute for Humane Studies, its broad mission is to support research on the classical liberal tradition. So they're interested in things like democracy, pluralism, rule of law, equality in law, sort of classical liberal ideas. The Mellon ACLS Dissertation Innovation Fellowship is, as you might take away from the title, looking for innovation in humanities scholarship for dissertations. And they have a fairly broad definition of that. They're looking for innovation in either how you present the dissertation. So do you want to do it as a digital project? Do you want to do it as a graphic novel? Are you working with sort of non-traditional populations outside of academia to produce your study? Are you using new methodologies or new sources? Are you trying different styles of writing, like using fiction as part of it or whatever? They're looking, what they mean by innovation is broad. So if you were pitching this project to people, what would you think the differences are? Well, that's okay. I put it on a slide. So for speaking to the IHS, the Institute for Humane Studies, you'd really want to focus on the things that fit with their mission. So you'd want to talk about how your project helps us understand the role of military occupation in shaping a post-war South. So shaping a period of emancipation, the establishment of a multiracial citizenry, and the establishment of enfranchising formerly enslaved people. Right? Those fit with the classical liberal tradition. Those are things you could bring to the forefront of your application for the AHS that would show them immediately that your work does fit with their broad funding mission. For the Mellon ACLS, they don't really care about the subject of what it is you're doing. At least with this project, that wouldn't be the part you'd want to emphasize to them. Instead, you'd want to go all in very quickly, explaining to them that you have this innovative methodology and an innovative way of presenting your project, that you're doing GIS-driven work, spatial history, spatial analysis, and that you're presenting it as an interactive website. That's innovative, that's different. That's the thing that the Mellon ACLS is going to care about. And also, as I said, there's going to be, if you study the funding organization and you're looking at, you can get a sense of, usually they'll tell you who the reviewers are or how the review process works. And you will know whether you're speaking to a generally expert audience or a sort of general, broad but educated audience. That's a fairly typical phrasing you'll see is something like educated lay people is your expected audience for reviewers. And so knowing that will help you think about the level of specificity that you can use when you're communicating to that audience. If you're talking to an expert audience, you can get into some of the more nitty-gritty of sort of the fine-tooth details of your project. You can talk about how this fits into debates in the field or the sort of fine-grained analysis in the field that other people in your field might be familiar with. But if you're not talking to that sort of expert audience, they don't care about any of that. They don't care about debates in your field. They don't care about micro periodizations or minute differences in approach. What they want to know is sort of what are the broader takeaways? How does your work connect to some of these broader questions that other fields might ask as well? And so here's one, you can read this example, but another one I came up with was, and this is for the STEM folks, this is one of the ones I added today, was maybe you're in engineering and you work on doing developing graphene filters for desalinization. Other engineers are going to care a lot about how you exactly your design and how you're implementing your graphene filter and some of those minute details of the design and the subtle differences in how your filter is different from the 10 others in development right now. People who aren't engineers don't really care about that. What they're going to care about is the big takeaway, which is that you're working on a way of producing, efficient and affordable water filtration that can be deployed in places it would be cost prohibitive to build an old-fashioned desalinization plant. So they want to know what that big takeaway is. So they want you to back out a couple of levels and not be thinking about those minute details, but pull yourself out from the sort of small scale and be thinking about sort of what are the broader impacts of the work you do.
I have a question. Should we assume those grant reviewers as expert audience or some general educated? For example, the NSF, should we assume them as the expert?
So through the NSF, they are going to be primarily experts. They're going to be scientists, but they're not necessarily going to be in your exact field.
Okay.
So they might be in related fields, but they may
But
not be
science,
in.
right? They
Yes,
should
but
science
they
and
will
literature.
they for this particular award for the NSF, they will be experts. So they will want to see that you know the language of expertise in your field, but they will also care that you can explain why broader audiences should care about your work. The NSF really cares about that because it is publicly funded. And
Okay.
so when it
So
puts the description of your work on its website, it wants the public to be able to skim through those things and understand why their tax dollars are going to that project.
okay. So I should put them into two levels, one for the expert and one for more general audience.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and we'll look at some examples of what that might look like in a paragraph. Okay, so I want you all to take a few minutes and think about this. What are the big questions that your work relates to? You know, if you're in a humanities field, your specific field is interested in questions, but so are the other humanities fields, right? The way like they share a lot of questions across things, like questions about citizenship or belonging or uh, borders or ecology. These are things multiple different humanities fields are engaging. They just do it in their own methodologies and in their own ways. But if you want to have other humanities people understand what your work is doing, you have to pull it back out to that big level that is shared across those multiple fields. So I want you all to take a few minutes and think about what those big questions are. What are some of the sort of fundamental questions of your field or of related fields and how your work relates to those? And what people in either other fields or just more broadly out there might care about in your work. So if you're a chemist, but you want a physicist to understand why your work is important, what sort of unites the things that you're doing?
I have a question. When you say field, do you mean the broader context of, so mine is education, or question of your field of your actual dip?
Yeah, I would say what you said first. What would other people in other areas of education, why would they be interested in the work you're doing?
That's what I thought, just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, so I think of this as sort of the mid-level. There's there's the field specific level. That's where you really can use all the jargon and technical terms that you want to and get into the nitty-gritty. And then there's that stepping out one layer to people in related disciplines, but they don't necessarily share exactly the same jargon and terminology that you do. So they'll understand a little bit of it, but you still need to be thinking about ways that you can talk about how your work relates to the work they do. And then there's the broadest level, which is if you're just talking to the public, a general audience, and you can't assume any sort of shared vocabulary. So right now we're thinking about that second level of people in related or adjacent fields to your own.
I wanna go.
Sure, please.
My research topic is about using video games to help people learn science, K-12 science. And my question is, answer to three questions is how to help people learn science and how to integrate video games in K-12 science education. And finally, how to make learning or science learning both effective and fun. I don't
That's
know
great.
if related area is more like my actual area. My topic is like a combination between science education and also the instructional technology.
Okay.
So this
Yeah. Well, I think that's great because that you would be able to then with how you just described that, you'd be able to make your research interesting to people who work on video games in other settings too, that have nothing to do with science education, but maybe they're working on either other educational games or just thinking about sort of interactive game design. And you'd be able to talk to people who are engaged in science education but not using video games to do it, and other sort of related areas of education thinking about instructional design. So I think that's, yeah, you're getting to that like what are the things that are broad and will bring in more audiences to care about the work you do.
Okay. Okay. Is that too narrow? Like only the people in the science education field and people in the educational game field? Is my question too narrow, do you think?
I don't think so, but I mean, you're going to work on a pitch later too, so you're going to work on that broader pitch. But I think this is a good start for thinking of how to get people who are in related fields to be interested in the work you do.
Okay.
Kevin, are you
So
sharing?
my research looks at carbon sequestration through time, and carbon and nutrient sequestration through time, and the Apalachicola Bay, and how these sediment characteristics have responded to anthropogenic and natural events. So I think, my research falls under the broad field of biogeochemistry, which looks at how environments are reacting to. Oh, do you want me to share so people can read along, or no?
You can just talk it out. That's fine.
Okay, cool. It's a lot. How are environments react, like environments globally reacting to climate change and anthropogenic disturbances, and how does the biology, geology, and chemistry of a given environment interact? So I thought maybe researchers in related field might care about, like biologists might care how much sediment was coming into the system and how that might affect like the oyster population. So it's kind of like a metadata that we have, or other metadata, like just the raw nutrient data. Ecologists might care about that, the effects on the food web from the ground up and how that affects the larger organisms. But yeah, that's what I got.
Sure. Yeah, and you have an easy pitch to make the audience care with oysters in Apalachicola Bay. So, anybody else want to share?
I do, please.
Yeah, please.
Just because I'm really struggling right now. I'm in my third semester and I'm like really trying to figure this out. So this is great, actually. So my so the big questions, I think, are state funded grants equitable for education? And I think that's probably the biggest question. And then what kind of matches with that as far as the field work is, we're always, how do we get new students? But not just how do we get new students, how do we get these students to graduate with a pathway that takes them to a job that can support their families, that are high wage, high demand. And then I think researchers would care because just through my research, I've found some things that like college and university staff, VPs, all of them, they're not involved in the decision making of the initiatives that are given down from the state. They're not involved in the decision making for funding and things like that. So I think it would be interesting for them to know that. And then just the fact that, how is the state held accountable? And so kind of pointing out some of those things that maybe need to be put in place to make sure that state grants are equitable. They are, attainable by any student who maybe, which it's state grant should just be open to anybody. So just trying to think through like what my actual research questions are going to be. And it's been very difficult because I'm focused on like one grant specifically that I already know is a failure. So like, I can't necessarily point that out. I just need to like find what my fundamental question is to ask, which I think is, our state funded grants equitable?
Yeah, so this is a great example, Christine, because Well, and Kevin, yours is too, because so both of you have very easy ways that you can broaden the appeal of your work just by sort of making it slightly less specific. So Kevin, just there's a lot of other people who are working on carbon sequestration in marine environments, but they're not doing Apalachicola Bay. So there's a whole series of network, of researchers out there who are going to care about your work. They just don't care about the place specific aspects of your work. Right? They care about the findings that are broader. And Christine, there's a lot of people who care about issues of government equity and government accountability, but they're coming at it from angles that aren't education based. So they're not looking at equity in an education grant, but they're looking at other ways that governments are equitable or not in the way that they administer funds. And they're looking at how different ways that you can measure and hold governments accountable for those decisions. So sort of if you back out far enough to the fundamental questions, you can easily see that there's a whole lot of people in other policy fields that would care about both of your, I mean, there are people, Kevin, there are people in policy fields who would care about your work, but there's also other people in research who would care about your work. But Christine, there's definitely, there's a lot of different people who do government policy research. They just don't do it for education. They do it in criminal justice, or they do it in transportation and safety, or whatever.
Thank you.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on just to make sure we have time to get to the rest. But thank you all for sharing, and Chezin, I see that you shared in the chat, so thank you for that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's sum up some main points that we've gone through so far. Avoid jargon, and if you have to use it, define it. And there's ways you can do this that work a little better, and so that you're not sort of spending too many words on a definition or having a sort of clunky definition built in. You can do things like, say, use a clause at the beginning of a sentence. Let's say you were defining FM synthesis. I know this came to mind because it's an example I've used before. You might say that modulating one sine wave with another, comma, or FM synthesis, blah, 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 was developed in the 1980s. So you can sort of define it, then have the term that the other experts in the field will understand, then go on, and you could keep using that term, but for lay readers, you've defined what that means for them. So now they know what FM synthesis is every time you come back to it. If possible, it can be really useful to use metaphors or similes to relate difficult concepts. The challenge of doing this is to take the complicated things that you work on and to make them understandable in ways that don't require complicated language. So if you can use sort of everyday examples or metaphors or similes to build common ground that more readers will be able to grab onto, that can make it really easy then to get people on board with understanding the complicated concept you're trying to get across. And a sort of related way that you can do that is to focus on the things that are the most universal. So as we just talked about, Christine, sort of, questions of equity and accountability are much more universal than talking about the administration of a state grant. So if you can back out to that level of the things that are more universal and use those to sort of establish a foundation that other people might think, oh yeah, I can see, we also ask these questions in my field, we just do it in different ways, or we're also interested in accountability, but in different contexts. So you've hooked them in with the things that are the most universal aspect of your work, and then you can narrow from there down to the things that are more specific to the way that you ask those questions. And of course, one way to bring in audiences is always to think about what is the sort of what's the most intriguing or perplexing or most interesting aspect of what it is you do. What's the hook? Try to remember what it is that made you interested in this research or brought you into this field. And think about those things that you can use to get other people excited, or to be thinking, oh, this is a puzzle. I can see why this would be interesting to research. So let's look at an example. I want you all to read through this and then tell me what you think this does well or doesn't do well in trying to explain why this person's research is important.
What was the question?
What do you think this does well or does not do well to explain why this person's research is important?
I think it falls into the trap of saying that their work can be important for like decision makers, but don't really say how exactly?
Yeah, sure.
More specific example.
I guess the author want to leave the specific application later because it's only an introduction, right?
Yeah,
It-
probably. So we can pretend this is an introductory paragraph to a proposal. It's
Yeah.
actually from somebody's grad impact profile on our website.
I think that the last sentence, my work has direct applications, is enough for me.
Okay. Yeah, and it would depend on, I mean, if this was in a, if this person was applying for the, there's a marine policy fellowship. Let's say they're applying for that. We would very quickly then want to see them do exactly what Kevin said they don't do, which is tell us what those implications are, because that would make that would show that they understand how research translates to policy. I think, yeah, leaving it as just has implications for policy would be way too vague for that and would show that they don't really understand what that conduit from research to policy looks like.
I do think it addresses all three levels. So you get the descriptive, you get the very much, this is my focus. So someone automatically understands what their focus is. Then they go give some detail for the more expert. And then at the end, they're saying, you know, with just a little bit more detail, but still being able to understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, I think two things always stand out to me in this one. Two things I really like about this. One is that second sentence does a great job of using everyday examples that other people will understand too. So we start with this thing of, you know, the first sentence says, I understand, or I aim to understand the processes that maintain high levels of genetic variation in nature. You could go from that first sentence to a very technical description of your research. That would leave a lot of readers behind. But the second sentence here tries very hard to establish to establish common ground and to show people what high levels of genetic variation in nature means in ways that should be understandable to many readers. Most people are familiar with cats, right? Like cats are an everyday common example. We can all think about having seen cats of all different colors, and we can understand then, oh, that's an example of the high levels of genetic variation this person is talking about. We don't think already that their research is focused on cats. We understand that as them saying, here's an example of the sort of thing that I research. And then they go to that very next sentence that explains why this is a puzzle in their field. You know, why this is something that captivates other researchers and why this is something that doesn't quite work the way that they assume it should. And so it presents that sort of, here's what's intellectually interesting about the work and why it's compelling to do research in this field. And then we do get, yes, a suggestion towards sort of the broader impacts, which is this, you know, has implications for conservation management. We don't know what those implications are, but we can understand that this person is trying to tell us their work has real world implications, and this is not, that it does have broader impacts. Presumably, if they were to go on with other paragraphs, we would get more of a discussion of what those broader impacts are, what that sort of, what those implications actually look like. But they're at least trying to tell us here, this is not just sort of esoteric work we do for the sake of doing it. This is work that has potential broad impacts. Okay, let's look at, so we're not going to go through all these examples, but I'll share this PowerPoint with everybody. You can look at these examples later. This one was actually pulled from a fellowship proposal, I think for the Ford dissertation or pre-doctoral fellowship, and it was a person who was funded. So this is their opening paragraph. What do you think appealed to reviewers here? I know this one's a little bit longer to read.
The author order the three importance wisely. The first importance is about the some basic medical theoretical uses, while the second one is the direct in some medical practice to repair some the surgery thing, while the last one is a long-term benefits. So the sequence, the logic is very clear.
Yeah, I agree. And see, there's a comment that says the last sentence is a good synopsis of why the research is important and what benefit it will have in the field and for the public. And so my highlighting here, I think this example does a good job of showing how this is connecting to and departing from the current state of the field. Very quickly, we established that this person understands the field, understands what is current in the field in terms of research, and is saying, look, we have these two questions we're asking in the field. If we combine those questions, we get my area of research. And so the teal color, the blue in the middle, then is they're talking there to other people in their field and saying what for other medical researchers, biomedical sciences researchers, what their research is doing for the field. And then the green is, yeah, I think a very good and clear, that's the sort of thing that, you know, a taxpayer could read that and understand, yes, I want my tax dollars going to this. I care about kidney health. We all have kidneys. We should all care about this research. I would see, you know, I'm in favor of my tax dollars paying for this to be developed. I think there's also very little sort of terminology here that's too jargon based or too technical for most people to be able to come in and understand what they're talking about. Now, I can read this and think that, okay, as this proposal goes on, I'm probably going to lose some of what they're talking about because they are going to get into some of that specialized discussion. My PhD is in history. I am not in biomedical sciences. I know I'm probably going to get lost, but I can understand the broad takeaway and I can understand their framing of what it is they're doing and why it matters. Okay, so we'll just look at this one last one for a humanities-based example. Obviously, this is for somebody's Fulbright application. I don't remember where I pulled this from, and I do not remember whether they were funded or not. It was not an FSU student.
It doesn't connect to any it's hard to see a real life translation of this research, but that's just me.
It is well, yeah, you STEM folks always have a leg up on humanities folks for answering that question.
Yeah.
So I come from a rural population in Kentucky. Basically, the entire state is rural. So I do think it's interesting. That kind of speaks to me, I guess, because I understand that population of people and how they perceive the changes that were happening around them. And I think you can actually apply that to today. Because a lot of those spaces are very much ingrained in tradition and the farming families. They've lived in the same house their entire life, and so did their grandma and their great grandma and their great great grandma, you know, like, so how life changes around us. I can see that applying to, you know, certain areas. I don't know that I can necessarily pick anything else out of it.
Sure.
But I think it's, I mean, I could see how it could apply to, you know, what's happening in today and how people are interacting with those changes.
Sure. I think this is a key sentence for this one, because for Fulbright, you're not being read by people in your same field. This person was applying to Spain. They could have been being read by people who are interested in, you know, 21st century trade agreements between the US and Spain. So you have people who have familiarity with the region or country, but don't necessarily have any familiarity with your particular field of study. And so they tell us very quickly what sort of insights religion as a field of study can offer. That might matter for people in other fields. A lot of people are interested in how we understand average or rural people who don't necessarily, especially in the 1800s, have a whole lot of sources that you can use to understand them. You know, they're not responding to Gallup polls They're not posting things on Twitter. So insight into that, into those people who, into the majority of people who have ever lived, then is limited. And they're telling us here that religion as a methodology, as a field of study, provides us a way to do that, which is an important key for people who aren't, for readers who aren't familiar with religion as a discipline.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
In the last sentence, the author used her previous research as evidence.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't cite or use some literature. Is it okay in some academic writing?
Yeah, I think, that's actually fairly common. You're basically saying that I've done some research into this already, and my preliminary results are showing me that I'm on the right track.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, if you have published your own work previously, you can also self-cite. Right, of course, you can do that. You actually can't do that in a Fulbright application. They're not allowed to use footnotes. So, and you wouldn't want to use space to a long parenthetical citation because your space is so limited. But it's perfectly fine in almost any fellowship or grant application. It's perfectly fine to indicate that you have already done preliminary research on this project. And it's, however you want to word it, but basically you're saying my preliminary research has shown me that, my hypothesis is so far proven correct. And so I think, again, this is, the yellow is they're identifying what previous research has done and, or sort of where a gap exists. And then, the teal again is sort of talking to people who are maybe more specialists in the field. And the green is an attempt, at least, at saying, this question here, effectively articulated collective concerns. That's sort of the broader impact that they're trying to get across to us, is that their research, and in fact, it might even be that their broad impact really is a methodological impact of saying that doing the type of research they do allows us insight into how people lived and thought at a time that we otherwise have a hard time getting access to. Okay. And so this is now, we're going to transition into breakout rooms, and this is what you all are going to do. You can just use this as a quick way of putting together a sort of elevator pitch. It's the ABT method, the and, but, therefore. And it basically just take this structure and fill in the blanks for yourself, and then go share it with each other. So you set the stage, join those facts together with an and. Then you have to use the word but to indicate the sort of, there's a problem with that approach, or there's a problem with the way things are. And the therefore is how you set up sort of your particular approach. So this example here is short and okay. It was, pulled from a website. But I'm going to advance to the next slide because it's my own example and I think it's better and goes back to the earlier example of mapping occupation. So you might say that, military occupation is important to the study of the history of Reconstruction. And there's a fair amount of work that's been done on it, and the role of the U.S. Army in settling labor disputes, quelling violence against free people, rebuilding infrastructure in the U.S. South. But because the data for a lot of that is pretty scattered and hard to find, most of that work so far has been very local in its nature. So it's been focused on, the military occupation near, I don't know, Mobile, Alabama, and not necessarily extrapolating to other places. So you could say then, therefore, my study, which is using GIS and pulling together a bunch of different sources to do this, is presenting a more holistic way of studying this information. Preliminary data shows that proximity to a U.S. Army post correlates positively to wage rate and negatively to violence against free people, demonstrating that free people farther from Army posts face worse social and economic conditions. So the therefore shows, the benefit of your approach and the way that it not just departs from previous research, but improves upon the things that have been offered previously. So take a moment, take a few minutes, write out a few sentences for yourself. You can even just jot it down. You won't be, you don't have to share what you write with each other, do things spoken. So just make some notes to yourself about sort of, if you were to use a structure similar to this, how you could sort of quickly pitch the significance of what it is you're doing. And this sort of pitch is important because, well, you might not ever put this exact sort of wording into any proposal, abstract, or anything that you write. If you can't articulate fairly quickly using a structure like this why your work is significant, then it's probably also not coming through in the longer form that you're trying to write it in a proposal. If I wanted to go back to my graphene example, I would say that climate change and water scarcity are, or climate change is exacerbating water scarcity around the world, and desalination is becoming a more important method for producing clean drinking water. But desalination is expensive and cost prohibitive in most places in the world. Therefore, my work is important because I'm working to develop a cheap and easy to use or easy to construct or easy to implement method of desalination using technologies that are available in developing countries.
So much
Just-
harder.
I like the ABT method.
Yeah, it's convenient. There were people, so I'm on the 4th floor of the Honor Scholars and Fellows house, and apparently last week there were actually people like getting on the elevator and riding it up to the 4th floor and doing pitches on the, like actually doing elevator pitches in an elevator. And it's only a 4th floor ride, so it's pretty short. Like you have to talk fast if you're trying to get that across. I have never so far actually had to do an elevator pitch in an elevator. Okay, well, I'm glad you all, thank you for participating in that, and thank you all for staying toward the end. I know sometimes we lose a lot of people right at the hour mark if we do an hour and a half workshop because people have to go like, 2:30 or whatever. I'm going to launch a little poll that we use just to get feedback on our surveys. Do you all see it? I just got a thing saying there was an error with the poll. Okay, it looks fine. There will also be a follow-up email I will send out that will have the slideshow from today. Anything that looked like a link in the slideshow is actually linked. Although I don't think there were a whole lot of links in this one. We also did record this. We will maybe make the recording available. We did the same workshop in the fall, and we're going to see which recording was better. So if you want to go back and review it at any point, there will either be a new recording from this one, or you can go back and watch the last one from fall. But the recording, I think the main part of this is to actually get the interaction with each other and to practice saying what it is you do and see how people respond to it. And that part we don't record. So only the people who actually show up benefit from that.
Thank you.
Couple things I'll plug over the summer. If you think that you will be applying for if you're planning to apply to any sort of fellowship in the fall or maybe even as late as next spring, we will be doing a 4-part or 4-day writing workshop over the summer. It's going to be in early through mid-July. It has limited capacity. I think we capped it at 15 last year. We're going to do the same this year. In part, that's because we give participants a stipend, and so we have limited funding to do that with. But basically, over the course of those 4 days, we will work on sort of communicating why you're a good fit for that opportunity and how you should be pitching the significance of what you do for that particular opportunity. There will also be a chance to work on a draft and have feedback from both peers in the workshop and from Writing Center consultants. And then we'll come back together for a sort of final wrap up on both reviewing what we've done so far and thinking about how to turn that into the full application that's due whenever it's due for you. So you can be working on any sort of thing. Last year, we had people working on the NSF GRFP, the Mellon ACLS Dissertation Innovation Fellowship, the Fulbright, a whole bunch of different funding mechanisms. And just like today, they all had to be able to communicate those things to each other. And so I think that all, that led to them all having stronger proposals out of it. We had 14 participants, 11 actually made it as far as submitting. And so far, I've heard that 3 got the thing they applied for.
Is it in person or online workshop?
It was entirely online last year. I'm considering making it hybrid this year so that if you're at FSU over the summer, you could come in and work in our great hall and just have like a space you could work in. But I know many grad students are not here in the summer, so we would not make it fully in person.
Perfect. Can I have the link of application?
Yes, there is not one yet. So there will be, we'll be putting out a call for applications. There is we have like a fairly lightweight, but you still have to go through an application process so that we can select the 15 participants. And part of that means you have to tell us what it is you're actually going to apply for and know that you are eligible for that thing. So if you haven't selected, if you're not really planning to apply to anything, but you're interested in the workshop, you probably won't be selected for it because we want to prioritize people who know that they're applying to X in the fall. We're also going to do a 3-day funding finding workshop. So if you have no idea what you want to apply for and you just want to sort of brainstorm opportunities that might be good for you, we'll do a 3-day workshop in, I just penciled it in on my calendar today. So I am thinking that will probably be on June 19th, 21st, and 23rd. And over the course of that, we'll get into using some of the funding databases, but we'll also do some like self-assessment things so that you can be thinking about funding that really is relevant to you, like what your needs are, what things you need to do, what things you want to do, and then see if you can find funding that aligns with that. Are there questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Very helpful. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
One damn person put disagree for things again.
I know. I wonder if it's the same one.
I don't know. I looked up who it was last time, and they live in my neighborhood, Honorine.
You know them?
I don't know them, but I saw the address, and it's down the street from me. Yeah. I'm gonna look this one up too.
Yeah.
It was that last person who I just put into the waiting room and didn't
Tayo.
really seem to be participating.
Tayo, and he also said it was insightful despite not my field.
Okay, so it probably wasn't him.
But at the same time, he was not participating in.
But not his field. It was all fields.
Yeah. Well, he came late and yeah, but I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised if it's that one.
Yeah, there's
Because I went into
That's-
that breaking room and he did not participate and he just left at some point.
yeah, that's what I was wondering. That's what it seemed like to me. But I just screenshotted the chat so that I can see if it was somebody who also said, thank you, this was great, and then they said disagree, I might just delete the disagree. I might just,
Yeah,
I might fudge the data.
you should because. So
I mean,
you-
it's fine. We still hit our mark. We want, our mark is 85% of respondents should agree.
Okay,
And 1 out of 11 is not going to throw that off.
okay.
It just irks me though.
Yeah, it hurts me and I've not participated, like I've not hosted it, so. So
All
during,
right, well,
during the
yeah,
workshop,
that went well.
yeah.
They seem to be actually like doing pretty well in the breakout rooms. I
Yeah.
liked what I saw.
Same for me. I did room 2 and 3, and it was good work.
Yeah, that was good. So cool.
So
I'm gonna go figure out whether I have to do this Fulbright workshop or not.
yeah, just quickly, during
Yeah.
the workshop, I received an email from Vincent Juice. Remember, he was part of humanities. And look at what, so it was part of like the, the tons of email that Debbie sent. And he said, so the email is for faculty, like dear faculty, thank you in advance for serving as a member of a faculty mock study session for a PhD with the dates. Hello, this is news to me. Honorine never asked me to be part of this grant committee. I'm not available and will not do it. Honorine, before signing me up for this type of work, consult with me first. And so my name is I was copied on the email and my name is mentioned here because it says, please contact Honorine above and she can either download or upload for you, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, what the heck? Like, of course I would, I mean, it's not. So I said, hello, Vincent. I never asked you to be part of this grant. Oh, by the way, he's part of my committee, like dissertation committee. I sent him an email, 2 days after my defense to ask for his feedback. He never sent me anything, never even replied to my email. And here out of nowhere, he sent this email. So he replies to email, I never asked that you be part of this grant committee as I'm not participating. I'm only here to assist with the moving part of the workshops until the semester ends as the graduate assistant of the office, which you would know if he had actually read the email.
Right.
It must be another student who signed you up for it. I can look into it if you want to. He barely apologized, thanks for the clarification. Can you tell me who the students are who signed up? I know that I'm working with Mehdi and Karine for this. So you're working on something. Sorry for my confusion. Yeah, sure. So it's Mehdi Shalmer, who is the student
Okay.
who signed up for this workshop. And the funny part is that I know he's going to do it. So although he said, I'm not available and will not do it, I'm pretty sure he will do it because they're friends. They're really good friends. Although, he's supposed to be their professors. They, he got them into the programs because they're friends and he's faculty.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just like, seriously? And you barely apologize? Like, and then you said that, Karine and Mehdi are working on this. So you do it for some students, but not for others?
Well, I mean, that part's fair, but
then don't
he
lie.
didn't. Yeah, he didn't
Don't lie
handle
and
that
say
very,
you're not
very nicely.
available.
No.
And so mean, and he copied everybody. Kind of like, I mean, if it was yeah. So now I wonder if Mehdi asked any of his professor, because if he didn't ask him, he might have not asked anybody.
Well, it sounds like he did ask him because he said he knows he's doing it for Karine and Mehdi.
No, he's working on something with you. You're working with Mehdi on something else, no?
I'm not.
Because
No, he attended one of our workshops, and I feel like I mentioned something to him in the workshop. But
that there was, so.
No, I mean, my work with Karine is done. I'm not working with either of those students.
So yeah, his email was super cold. And
Yeah.
I was boiling from the inside. So Dr. Stephenson actually sent me a message on Team, and she was like, what the heck with this Vincent Rousse? And I'm like, right, like this you attacked me out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And she said, you should have apologized for your confusion and response. I'm going to follow up with him. I don't like that at all. He's going to hear from me. And I said, I'm boiling from the inside. And she said, rightfully so. If he took the time to read the email, he would know in what capacity, you're involved.
Right. And like, he also knows that you're the GA for this office because he did the workshop and you reached out to him in that capacity.
Exactly. And why would I'm graduating? Why would I be part of a workshop series that goes over the whole summer? That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So yeah, you barely apologize. And now I'm boarding from the inside in.
Yeah, you don't even want his feedback anymore.
Well, I know he didn't actually. So to me, that's the confirmation that he only read the introduction of my dissertation, because all these questions and feedback during the defense were good, but they were about the broad work of working with graphic narratives and the introduction.
Okay.
So it was kind of like the confirmation that, he didn't read anything besides the introduction. So he doesn't want to send me the stuff, but he could have just replied like, oh, sorry, I didn't make comments on the document. I read through it and wrote my comments or my questions on a piece of paper or whatever, but don't ignore my email.
Yeah.
Ugh,
I'm sorry.
Okay, so that was
you can't trust anthropologists, Honorine.
Yeah, well, now he's in French though, but I guess he still has.
Yeah, but he's an anthropologist.
Yeah, and he got that job because he's friend with one of the director, the most important person of the department. Like he was a trans. Yeah.
Okay. Sure.
And he's doing a lot of favorites, especially with Karine and Mehdi, which a lot of other students don't like at all.
Yeah, that never goes over well. That's a shame, because that's the sort of like it was important to me as a grad student to not go to a place that had a lot of, that's part of the reason I didn't want to stay at Mississippi. It was like very cliquish and there were professors who had their favorites. And I didn't really want to like stay there for my PhD, and Rice did not feel that way. So It matters. So you have to pay attention to that.
For sure. No, the Midi and Karin are the big favorites of the department, especially from him and Dr. Monroe, who is one of the most important person in the department, and the director of the Windstrapking Institute, which give all the money.
Yeah.
So
I do not. Nobody has sent me yet the
PowerPoint.
or put it in the folder that I have access to.
And you ask for it?
Oh, I have asked for it.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to record that one, even though we've been recording things, but
Yeah. For sure.
oh well.
Yeah. Well,
All right. Well, thank you for helping with this. Sorry you had to
no
deal with
problem.
that.
No, sorry, I was answering to those email and trying to find out, even though I'm pretty sure knew it was Midi, I just wanted to confirm before I gave his name. But I was not super focused on the workshop at some
Oh,
point.
that's fine, Irene. You did everything I needed you to do for it, which is just create the breakout rooms and then, you know, make sure they were on task in a breakout room.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. Good luck with your workshop.
Yeah, thanks. So what time is Samya supposed to come over here on Friday? Is he? Like, is he coming over earlier in the day at all?
No, I think he's gonna work from home before.
Okay.
And then he will come. So his class finishes at 3:30, I believe. Let me double check. Yes, it finishes at 4:30. Sorry, it finishes at 4:30. And so he said
Right.
he should be here like by 4:45.
Yes. It's not a 15-minute walk, so I hope he can get here a little earlier than that.
Yeah. Although he does seem slow.
Yeah. Oh, he does.
Well, the
I
way
noticed I had to laugh a little bit on as soon as he walked in, you asked him how his weekend was, and he was like, it was okay.
yeah, you see, that's all. And then I realized, I guess it's more like, because he was very talkative with all the Indians that came to the celebration of excellence. Like he was really talking with them and sharing and smiling, and I was like, okay, I guess you may be not comfortable with me. But all right, it's okay.
Yeah, well, maybe it's just in person.
Well, he was not more talkative with me in person, though.
Oh. Well,
Yeah.
maybe he's more uncomfortable talking to you because you're a woman. It's like,
Maybe I think he's shy, and talking to people from his country is easier. There is a connection, like I get that. But
yeah.
it was more a realization like, okay, so you can talk actually.
Yeah, I mean, I got him to chat a little bit about what he wants to do after he graduates.
Okay.
So he wants to go to Columbia for film school.
But like he was giving you details, or you had to ask many questions?
No, actually, he was giving me some details.
Oh yeah, so I guess it's because of it, but because to me he gives me like the answer.
I don't know.
No, well, it's okay. All right, thank you so much.
Okay, I just got emailed the PowerPoint, so I'm not
Perfect.
completely in the dark for this one now.
You 20 minutes to get your script ready.
Fortunately, it's only a few pages. It's eligibility for Fulbright, which I know pretty well, application checklist, selection process, how ONF and OGFA can help, and then we make time for questions.
Oh, not too bad.
Yeah, and I know all that pretty well.
Oh, perfect. You see, easy peasy.
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna
Yeah.
get ready for my coffee and conversation while you get
Yeah,
ready.
and great luck. Best of luck for your interview. I'm sure it's going to go well. Just like I said, I would say, take a deep breath beforehand.
Yeah.
Try to relax and just remember that like they're interviewing you because they're also trying to get a sense of whether they want you as a colleague.
Okay.
They know about your qualifications on paper. They've already decided you're qualified, or they wouldn't be interviewing you. Now, of course, there's still like the are you as qualified, you know, are you more qualified or less qualified than other people? But also part of the reason they're interviewing you is just simply like, do we jive with Honorine? Would we like her as a colleague? Does she seem to fit with our department?
Yeah.
So you can always when they give you a chance for questions, one of the ones that you can always get them to say some stuff about is ask them about their students, ask them what their favorite thing about teaching at Vanderbilt is.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, it was just like, what are the students like there? Point out that you have familiarity with a broad range of students from Agnes Scott to Arizona State to Florida State. But getting them to just talk, because you can also sort of get a sense from the way they answer that of, do you like the way they're talking about their students? Do they sound to you like good colleagues?
Mm.
You can, you should also think about the fact that you are interviewing them a little bit too.
Okay.
So
Okay.
just keep feelers out for anything that comes across as a red flag.
Mm.
Not that anybody would say this, but if they're like, yeah, these kids are stupid and I hate teaching them.
Yeah, that definitely is a red flag.
Yeah.
So what are students at Vanderbilt like? Or what are they like?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Okay.
Bonnie just said she thinks the dates in the PowerPoint are wrong, so
Oh, shoot.
okay, it's just one date that's wrong, or two. I can fix it.
Okay, I'll let you work on that. Thank you.
All right, Honorine, thanks so much for helping today. And again, just relax, you're gonna do great.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.